Managers that I've spoken to all say they absolutely struggle to have that first difficult conversation. I'm Davies, I'm an interim project manager in the NHS and I'm a CEDR-Accredited mediator. So I started off life I was a science graduate, so I was in clinical research and clinical trials for about 10-15 years, and then I moved into project management, and again it was very much within the health space and research, and then I was offered some project work for Oxford University hospitals, which I did, which was a 9-month project, which was a big organisational change involving lots of the clinical and research areas, my interim project management career just launched from that really, and it was during my time there that I actually also volunteered for the British Red Cross. I was working for their fire and emergency support service and dealing with major incidents, fires, floods. We were attached to Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue, so we got paged to go and support them for whatever was going on. And I think when you're dealing with people in crisis, they're often very agitated, very anxious, very distressed. And sometimes there were people who were very aggressive, particularly if it was sort of civil unrest. And I was often the person that was asked to calm somebody down if they were being particularly agitated. But somebody said to me once, well, why don't you become a mediator? You should train as a mediator. And I thought actually that would be a really useful thing to do, to gain those skills. And so I started asking around. And because I was working for Oxford University hospitals in my project management role, I said, who does all your dispute resolution? So they said, oh, well, we don't have an in-house function, but we do use external mediators. And so I contacted various service providers, and the CEDR name came up again and again. And when I looked, it seemed to be the most comprehensive. And then I contacted the organisation in Oxford who were providing the hospital, the trust, with their mediators. And they said, basically, if you want to work through us, CEDR is the gold standard. Train with CEDR and we can guarantee you, we can give you work. During the pandemic, I absolutely know I was the critical care project manager for COVID for the 2 years. And I absolutely wouldn't have been able to have done that job without having had my CEDR training, because it was just completely unprecedented. The work we were doing, there was no blueprint for it. We were having to create processes as we went along. And the number of stakeholders that I had to liaise with, internal and external, during that time, during the COVID response, I don't think I would have had the confidence or the tenacity or the empathy to deal with some of the things that I had to deal with without having my CEDR training. And that saved me in that as a project manager in those 2 years, because I think the negotiation skills that we were shown and taught through our training absolutely came into play, because I was liaising with so many stakeholders to try and get everything in place for the critical care team. It was, I would have been floundered. I think I would have thought, oh, this is just overwhelming. But actually, I just relied on my mediation skills, and it really, really helped. I had liaised with external stakeholders before in my previous roles, but never to the level that I was doing during the COVID pandemic. It was literally everything from the Army, the RAF, through to oxygen suppliers, through to stores, procurement functions, pharmacy functions. It's rostering systems, literally everything and anything. Yeah. Which is not my area of expertise, none of those are, but having to liaise with other people, the negotiating skills and the mediation skills that I gained from CEDR literally saved me for in that role. When you're dealing with a big project and you're pulling together groups of people from around the trust, from all different specialties, sometimes they're not all on board with the project that they feel is being implemented. The trust have decided we're going to implement this new system, or there's a new organisational change happening, and not everybody is on board with that. So as the project manager, you're constantly dealing with disparate groups of people who may or may not be engaged with the process that they're being asked to do, and also problem solving. So as a project manager, you're looking at risks, you're looking at mitigating those risks and dealing with the issues as they arise. So I was always the problem solver, and actually it was really helpful for me to learn how to support other people to solve problems and not be the one going in and trying to solve the problem. Yeah. So as a mediator, you're there to support them coming to their own conclusion about what's the best way forward for them, and just supporting them through that process. And that for me was a game changer in terms of the project management I was doing. The most recent mediation, which was over a year ago now, was just after we came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the mediation work at the trust that I was working in Oxford had been paused because most of the staff were not coming into the hospital other than the clinical frontline staff. And something had been sort of brewing before the pandemic. And when the pandemic was, the response was officially declared as completed after 2 years, the mediation work ramped up again. And there was a very interesting case where somebody who had been largely at home for the 2 years of the COVID response had become very anxious and had created quite a strange narrative about what they felt had been going on with their manager during the absent period, and had almost created an example in their head of why they felt they weren't going to have a job to come back to, which was absolutely not the case. But it was very interesting to hear how somebody who'd felt quite isolated, so had been at home mostly on their own throughout the pandemic, keep in touch phone calls and Teams calls with their colleagues, but largely had not been with anybody, not family, not friends, and had decided for themselves that there was something going on with their job that meant they wouldn't have a job to come back to. And they didn't feel reassured by HR saying, no, this is absolutely not the case, you will be coming back to the workplace, we'll do a phased return for everybody who physically has to come back into the hospital. But this individual, she was absolutely adamant that this was almost like a conspiracy going on, and had actually suffered quite badly with her mental health during the COVID pandemic. So that was a really interesting for me to deal with, because it wasn't a clear case of this is what's happened, this is the situation we find ourselves in, this is my dispute with the other person. It was almost something that had been made up by her, but she absolutely believed it. And it was really difficult for her to want to come in and sit physically in the same room as her line manager.
Wow.
And I felt that doing the mediation remotely wasn't going to work, because I felt I needed to physically be in her space to help her overcome some of her challenges and her thought processes. But it was really quite interesting to see how somebody's thoughts and feelings could become in their mind absolute fact without anything externally to back up those thoughts and feelings. And it was really, really hard work for her to unpick that. So first of all, it was just me and the lady having one-to-ones, and me and her line manager having one-to-ones, and trying to work out what she needed to hear, what she needed to see, what she needed to read that would convince her that she absolutely did have her role to come back to. And emails from HR weren't doing it. Literally written statements saying we've amended your contract, you've got a phased return to work, these are the days you've agreed you can come physically into the trust, these are the days you've agreed you will work from home until you've done your phased return, these are the hours we've agreed with you. Still didn't believe it. So that was something I hadn't encountered before. I think it's hugely valuable, and we talked about it, and I had discussions with the senior HR teams at the trust, and they've been talking about doing that for some time. I think where the problem was is that they often wanted people who already had a role in the trust. So perhaps somebody within HR, somebody within organisational development, or within another area of the trust to take that role on. And actually, first of all, the staff members aren't always very comfortable having somebody from HR become their mediator, because if something is going to go further down one of the HR processes, then of course that HR person may have to be involved in a different role. But also, people don't have the time. If you've got a full-time job and you're in HR, or you're in procurement, or you're in organisational development or whatever, they barely have time to get their lunch, never mind to do a dual role as a mediator. And they want to feel that you're independent of the trust. They don't want to think that you might be best friends with their line manager, or you might have worked with their line manager, or if you're in HR, whether that's going to affect next time they want to ask for an internal promotion or have their appraisal. That they just feel that whatever they say to their line managers and to human resources or to their training lead, that they need to be separate from the issues that they're experiencing as an employee. So yes, it's something I've talked at length with not just Oxford University hospitals, but other trusts in London that I've done work for as a mediator, that absolutely need a separate function that just provides mediation service and dispute resolution and training, not just to deal with the mediation itself, but to help managers and support them to learn how to recognise conflict in the workplace and how to have difficult conversation. A lot of managers in the NHS have come up the ranks, so they started off as a clinician or as a radiographer or as a porter or as a phlebotomist, or they're in research or science, and they've come up through the ranks. So they're excellent scientists, excellent clinicians, but they don't always have the skills to be excellent managers, and they don't always get that training as part of their induction. So they don't have the innate skills to do dispute resolution, and they don't know how to attempt to deal with having a difficult conversation. So often they try not to. They avoid those situations, and that's where the issues start. And if you're an excellent clinician, that's great, but you also need to be a budget manager. You need to be able to look at the rostering system and understand it. You need to understand the financial impact. You need to be able to liaise with your finance business partner. You need to manage your staff. You need to be able to have return to work interviews when staff are off sick. You need to be able to liaise with occupational health.
Give feedback.
That whole area is something that some people have never, ever encountered as part of their role before, and suddenly they're expected to manage a whole team of people and to be adept at all of those things. And very often that's where they feel very vulnerable and very anxious, and they avoid some of those, as we all do as humans. You avoid the things you're not comfortable with, but there's that usually comes back to bite them, because then things that need to be dealt with don't get dealt with until they get to a point of if like the cauldrons. The pressure is built to the point where there's an eruption, and then suddenly it's a very big issue, and it needn't have been such a big issue. I think it's finding the right people to champion the mediation process. I don't think I've ever come across a leader in the NHS who didn't believe in it, but it was never a priority. So they, costs, time, they will always use those as reasons why they can't do it right now. And I think it's just winning more hearts and minds. But I think having perhaps getting the right people together, which I believe is going to happen, to have a focus group and to get champions within organisations, education and the NHS. I think that will drive it forward, and having champions within the workplace who will advocate for this. And I know lots of people who already are, but I think they need to have support from their senior management. The senior leadership needs to be on board with that and see the value and actually invest in it and agree and commit to investing in it, not in an ad hoc way, but in a sort of pre-organised way.